Checo decided he wanted to do a very different kind of Mexican wave. Welcome back to Motorsport 101, or as they say back in his home country, a wave. Hi guys, welcome to episode 481 of Motorsport 101. I could just see the grimace on RJ's face as I came through that joke. How you doing, big man? I love the sarcastic applause I got in the background there. Like that's dad joke central for me on that one.
It's cold now. Halloween's over. Racing season's almost over. Like, what are we going to do in a few months?
I don't know. Like we're in November. We're recording this literally on November 1st, and it's like this is it. This is normally the last month of the year for major motorsport. We're in the business end of things now, and we've still got 3 F1 races and 3 MotoGP races to get through between now and the end of the month.
I love calendar bloat. It's great.
Don't worry, it's only going to be even worse next year when MotoGP has a race in the last week of November and Formula 1 goes into December again. Yeah! We're doing an F1 race 2 weeks before Christmas. What the fuck are we doing here? Honestly. I could go into calendar bloat for a whole podcast if I really wanted to. But yeah, it's just me and RJ O'Connell again here on Motorsport 101. Cam is still a little bit sick off the back of COVID. Get well soon, buddy. We miss you. So again, forgive us for a lack of a MotoGP episode. We still got 2 on deck. We're going to be doing that hopefully next week because, hey, it's an off week for MotoGP. Isn't that convenient? Thanks, guys, for your 1 week off in your 6-week bumper way of closing out the year. Also, I wanted to pick your brains on something, RJ, because we've been talking about this on the podcast a little bit in between weeks, and obviously because IndyCar is kind of done for the year, we can't obviously dedicate a full show towards it. But did you see the news from Marshall Pruitt over on Racer.com this afternoon about the fallout at Juncos Hollinger Racing? Because it's worth talking about. Callum Illot is out in that team, and it's almost certain that Romain Grosjean is going to be going over there to take his place instead. I mean, insert where we learned that it's Romain Grosjean or they swerve us somewhere in post-prod. But yeah, this is weird. I didn't actually think that they were going to split. I had a feeling, first of all, I knew that this was never going to be Callum Illot's forever. He's too good a driver to just stick with Juncos Hollinger and, if this had worked out, they could have been together for 15 to 20 years and built something together. It's never going to be like that. I gave Ricciardo Juncos the benefit of the doubt. Obviously, he handled this all very poorly. And swapping out Callum Illot for Romain Grosjean to me, and I don't really want to sound like a Romain Grosjean hater because I do think he's still got value and is still very quick, but you've made your team older and you've arguably put in a more combustible element within your team, because when Romain Grosjean has his good days, it's great. And when he has bad days, ooh. When he had his bad days, we all know about it. Let's put it to you that way. He does a very bad job of keeping that under wraps. So when he has a bad day, we all know about it. And this is my problem with it. I mean, if you read the Marshall Pruitt piece, it's not pretty. It's not a good look for Juncos Hollinger at all, and especially for Ricciardo. There was apparently big beef at the Indy 500 earlier this year when Callum was screaming to get a chassis changed, and he was right in order to think he had to get a chassis changed because the one he had wasn't quick enough, and it got so explosive with Ricciardo that they almost cut him right there and then, to the point where they almost benched him and put in another driver straight away. Apparently the tension was that explosive. We've talked on this show earlier this year about the incidents like at Long Beach and obviously the season finale where tempers flared. The Argentine fans were very outspoken about how they felt about Callum's place in the team and how he was driving compared to Agustin Canapino. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't good. And as RJ alluded to, I completely agree with him. I think Juncos handled it terribly. They could have stuck up for their driver. They could have done more to protect him, and they didn't. They chose not to. They sat on their hands during most of the nastiest parts of the criticism. I mean, it's not a good sign at Long Beach when the series itself had to step in on social media, more than the team did. And then for the season finale, which Callum was in no way responsible for any of of the nastiness of what happened during that weekend, like the team sat on its hands for 2 days and then decided to step in. It's like, oh, guys, let's all calm down about this. My man has already locked his Twitter account because he's that annoyed about all the criticism he's gotten. With a Twitter account that's got almost 100,000 followers on it. Like, it was all sorts of ugly. And I've tried to give Ricciardo Juncos the benefit of the doubt regarding this. I've held back on writing certain pieces about the situation because it's like, well, I want to give the man every chance to defend himself because, hey, we may have got the Palou situation a little bit wrong in hindsight in regards to how that legal discourse breaks out. Hard for me to defend Ricciardo on this one, like really hard. And it gets a little uglier when you realise that Callum and Grosjean have the same manager as well.
That's also crazy too.
Mm-hmm. Like there is an above 0% chance that collusion may have taken place here, which is
to be fair, like both drivers ended up in like very, very terrible situations by the end of this because on top of Callum Illot being pushed out of his team, Romain Grosjean might have gotten screwed over in contract arbitration by Andretti Autosport.
It's both of their drivers have got in very sticky situations, and like you said, it seems to me that from what I've been told by people behind the scenes, there's a good chance it goes to court with Grosjean. It looks like there's no ground that's being broken on arbitration talks in regards to Grosjean's situation at Andretti. It may end up in a court. There's a good chance, apparently, it will now end up in a court. So let's see how that plays out. Because
do you think that Ricciardo and Callum end up in court out of all this gut feeling?
I don't know. It's at the end of the day, on what grounds? We all knew that Juncos had the right to extend Callum for an extra year, and he just chose not to take the option up. And that's his right. Even if, as you said, I think it's a completely batshit decision. Callum's the best driver they've ever had. Grosjean, yes, on a good day, can be as good, if not maybe even better than Callum has been in his IndyCar career to date. But your team is older. And how is Grosjean going to be able to cope in a team that is Canapino's in all but name?
Both drivers also look very similar, which is going to be even crazy to think about. Like you put a picture of Romain and put a picture of Augustine next to one another, and they're just like, yeah, these two look the same.
Yeah, it's that meme of the officer goes, yeah, they're both the same picture. Yeah, it's kind of a weird one.
I don't know what to make of this. Like other than like, yeah, with better public relations and better like interpersonal handling, this could have been like handled a lot better. Yeah, no shit, RJ.
Yeah, it's just a sad story because Juncos is genuinely one of the before this, what I would have said was Juncos is one of the underdog stories, one of the true, genuine underdog stories in IndyCar. And the fact they went from minnows and scraping together a program to bump Fernando Alonso out of the 500, they've become a bona fide, full-time two-car operation. They've got both cars in the leaders' circle this year.
The team also effectively died over COVID. And this is still like one of the smaller teams. And I'm sure that like, you know, I wouldn't feel disgusted rooting for Romain Grosjean to finally win one of these, or for Agustin Canapino, who has no single-seater background, to break through and put some solid results together, given his background.
By all accounts, they're good people. And like I know Grosjean gets a bit of a bad rap on the internet sometimes, but I think the good of Grosjean far outweighs the bad, and Canapino, by all accounts, was, you know, he was exactly what fans want an IndyCar driver to be, someone who embraces the series, warts and all, someone that learned English in only a handful of months in order to better adapt to the series and to be able to better communicate with his team. He qualified for the 500 at his first attempt. He had a wonderful Messi branded livery on his car, which gained a lot of fans and won a lot of people over. they're meant to be the easy team to root for, and they've shot themselves in the foot by how badly they've handled this. Like, and it's a real shame because I know there's a lot of good people in that Juncos camp, and I know Ricciardo. I want to think Ricciardo means well, but he's been so candid in how he's gone about this that it's going to make people cynical about him, and I don't want that to be the case. But he's leaving me with little choice, and that's what makes it so frustrating. You know,
like, can you remember like an F1 situation that was like this? Because like, people have drawn comparisons to like Lotus in 2014 when it was Grosjean and Maldonado. How combustible that could have been, but at least it's just like, you know, with Juncos Hollinger, you expect them to be a lower midfield team, and they were a lower midfield team, whereas Lotus 2014 is just like, yeah, all the cards and all the foundation is crumbling.
Yeah, it maybe early Red Bull when they were buying people like Seb Bourdais out of their contract and shit like that is probably the nearest comparison I can draw. Because by all accounts, the Lotus 2014 team got along, it's just they were skint. And we all saw that weekend in Belgium where Grosjean got on the podium the same weekend the bailiffs were in. And, you know, but that's a bit more of a business problem than a interpersonal problem, I suppose. To have it to that, but even in Formula One, to have a team fall out to that degree that just doesn't happen. Normally, somebody just goes off, or somebody gets chopped, or moves teams. Like, I think Mercedes in 2016 could have gotten to that point, but Rosberg retired before it really reached its apex, which I guess kind of transitions us kind of nicely to actually talking about Formula One this weekend.
Formula One, La Ciudad de Mexico.
We'll do the social media at the end of the show on this one because we've done 10 minutes on the opening segment already, which is kind of fun. But it was the Mexican Grand Prix this weekend in Formula One, and for better or for worse, it was a Grand Prix that will likely be defined by the first 15 seconds. Sergio Perez, who, for some backstory, was out-qualified by Daniel Ricciardo's AlphaTauri, got a brilliant launch, goes into turn one, tries to go 3 wide.
Now, we watched this together, right? And I will say in all confidence, because Sergio Perez is one of my guys. He has been since that miracle season in 2012. And I'm thinking, right, this is going to be the year that he gets it together. And he gets a great launch, and then he gets a run that looks like it's going to take him to the front of the field. And as we're all watching together, I'm just like, he's pulled out 3 wide. I'm like, do it. Go on. Do it. And within seconds, I immediately regret everything I have thought and said, and I just want to crawl into a hole and bury myself in dirt.
Oh, it was the hero move that he tried. He basically did what Max Verstappen tried to do a couple of years ago in 2021, where he went around the outside of both Mercedes and actually pulled it off, to his credit. This one, well, Perez hooks the inside of Charles Leclerc's pole-sitting Ferrari. He's in the middle of a 3 wide. There's nothing Leclerc could have realistically done. He was very reasonable on all sides. And Perez hooks him, punches a big old hole in his side pod. He actually goes airborne briefly, eventually crash lands. He's able to get the car back to the pits somehow, but the damage is too extensive. His day is done after just a couple of minutes. And yeah, that was that. And well, the race was pretty straightforward after that for his teammate Max Verstappen, who, and yes, get your Sweet 16 jokes in now, because it was his 16th win of the season, a new Formula One world record. We've never had a 16-win season in F1 history before until this past weekend. And the one that's terrifying to me is that was his 51st career win. Max Verstappen now has the same amount of wins as Alan fucking Prost. He's 27. He's now equal.
He's 26. That's what's even more crazy.
I think he's 27th later this month, isn't he? Like he
turns 27 next year. Turned 26 this September.
Fuck
but
off.
Even still, it's his 9th season. He has 51 wins, and he's still only at 26 years old.
That is utterly again. I've looked at recent form. 16 wins this year. He's now had 41 wins in the last 3 seasons. That's the same amount of wins as Ayrton Senna's entire career, and he's done it in 3 seasons. He's won 30. He's won 31 out of the last 41 Grand Prix.
That's ridiculous.
I know it sounds like we might be beating the old drum on this show by saying this, but this is otherworldly what we're watching here. We have never seen dominance like this in Formula One. And if you watch that race, you'd see the exact same story. Like, there was a key incident, there was a red flag, literally half distance when Kevin Magnussen's left rear suspension failed, had a nasty crunch into the wall, car burst into flames. It was a complete write-off of a car. Thankfully, Kevin was okay, but it forced a red flag to fix the barrier from the impact, and it kind of took a lot of the strategy away from this race because it was looking like Red Bull might two-stop. But they did in the end anyway, because Max had 20 seconds in front. You only lose 12 on a safety car. So they were like, well, sod it. Let's cover our asses and come in and pit for new tyres now and get that stop out of the way. It worked to perfection. And then the red flag came out, so it didn't matter anyway. The only drama was really a second standing restart, and Max nailed that one too. So it was over. Like he just took chunks of time out of Lewis Hamilton lap after lap, and that's how it ended up. A Verstappen, Hamilton, Leclerc top 3 in the end. But
the result you expected. But I think, obviously, we got to talk about Sergio Perez because,
of course,
you see that Daniel Ricciardo out-qualified him in the AlphaTauri, and you think, oh my God, Sergio Perez, in the best car ever built, got out-qualified by the worst car. The margins were actually pretty close between him and Verstappen compared to most weekends. Like, he wasn't that far off. It was 3rd versus 5th on the grid. And plus, Mexico City is a place where you get such a big toe down the front stretch, particularly off a standing start, where you think, this is possible that Sergio Perez can have a good day. And I thought to myself, if this is ever going to be the year that Sergio Perez wins his home race, it's going to be this year. And that hope lasted about 20 seconds. I think there's a good deal of people that came to see Sergio Perez win this race, leaving early. There's still a good crowd that stuck around. Got to give it to them. But that was not good. And like, I know I don't think Red Bull is going to do the thing that everybody wants them to do, which is, of course, put anybody else in the car other than Sergio Perez, likely Daniel Ricciardo, and we'll talk about it in a second. But like, I don't think they will. I wouldn't want it, but like, I get it. I get it if they did.
Let's just say Red Bull's been far more ruthless and far less justified in some of its driver swaps than it would be if they were to cut Sergio Perez at the end of this season, is what I would say. And I think that's a reasonable take in regards to this. I mean, Austin will caveat about ruthless cuts, about how Red Bull have treated some of their dudes in the past.
Pierre Gasly, ask Alexander Albon. And all of this stems back to when Daniel Ricciardo walked out of Red Bull in 2018, went to Enstone, and they couldn't get Carlos Sainz. So it was just like, okay, what do? We promote Pierre Gasly. Maybe Pierre Gasly wasn't the right driver at the right time. So like, okay, let's try again with Alex Albon. He's a different kind of rookie. And after a year and a half, they decide, we're done with this. Sergio Perez is almost out of the sport. And they're like, finally, we get an experienced guy who's not necessarily a Red Bull guy. This is what we need to push the team forward. And it's been good at points. Like, let's not forget that Sergio Perez has won 2 races this season. It's not an out-and-out abject failure, but like,
it feels like it.
If Red Bull was not by far and away the best team in the sport with no other competition, and I think this is what's driving a lot of this angst with Sergio Perez, because it's just like, well, if Mercedes and Ferrari and McLaren are not going to give them the fight, then surely we could have intra-team competition for a world championship. And that hasn't been a realistic prospect since Miami. And Perez has not been the same driver since getting beat straight up by Max Verstappen in Miami.
I think you had that as the key flashpoint, and I think you're right that that's the key flashpoint. That was a race that Sergio Perez was destined to win. He started on pole. Verstappen couldn't get a clean lap away. He was starting 9th that day. That was a race that was built for Checo to win. And then when I saw that Max was going faster than him on 20-lap older tyres, I was like, no, this is not happening this year. It was a tire management one-stopper race. That is normally Checo's bread and butter, street circuit-esque sort of track, and tire management was the prevalent factor, and he lost. He was beaten straight up, and
he would have done better in a worse car in some of because like that's the thing. People talk about, can Checo drive fast setups? People doubt that he can. I don't understand how a driver that was so good at getting the best out of midfield, upper midfield cars now suddenly can't do it in a Red Bull.
I think Jenson Button summed it up quite well, because this was around the time, I think, back in September when everybody was off.
My boss is going to give you some words about that. Because they've been going back and forth since Didham's Gate in Austin.
Oh God, that's going to be fun. let me see some of those chats regarding that later. No, I was going to say, like, this. If you remember back in September when there was a big debate doing the rounds between, like, because Hamilton put it out there that, oh, I've had better teammates than Verstappen has had, and look, I stand by this, Matt. Like, Lewis knew exactly what he was doing when he was making those comments. And then, like, they asked Jenson Button what he thought of the matter, and Jenson, I think, broke it down very, very well, is that, yeah, he said that Hamilton's probably had better teammates, but he also thinks that what makes Max so good as a driver is that he is able to deal with extreme setups. Like, I think his theory was that Adrian Newey develops the fastest F1 car he can possibly make and basically tells Max, look, this car's not going to be very fun to drive, but if you can handle it, it will go faster than God.
And that's generally what he does. It reminds me of the Schumacher years at Benetton. You know, that's 94 especially, that was not an optimized car. And look, people still think about all the conspiracy theories of the tricks that were inside that car, but I don't think it was just that. There was a reason why 3 different other drivers, not named Michael Schumacher, couldn't really do anything in that car, and Michael won a world championship in it.
Michael was a God-given gift. Like I've said, I don't want to go into too much of a tangent here on this one, but like, if God decided to make a racing driver, it would probably look something like Michael Schumacher. He was so far ahead of his time in terms of work rate, fitness regimen, you know, dedication to the craft, being a ruthless cyborg, but he also had some of the same speed that previous legends had, like an Ayrton Senna or a Nigel Mansell. He was the amalgamation of, like, if you were building a Frankenstein's monster of F1 drivers, it would probably look something like what Michael ended up with.
Could it also look like Max Verstappen? Well,
look, he's a 3-time 50-win world champion. He's one of the best of all time already. Like, by most statistical measures, he's a top 10 driver ever, in my opinion, and he's not 10. That says a lot about where I think Max is at the moment. I mean, this is the greatest 3-year run we've ever seen in Formula One. He had a all-time classic title fight with Lewis that he won, yes, under via dubious circumstances, but these 2 seasons...
emails.
Oh, yeah. But, I don't care. But these 2 seasons have been, without any question, statistically, the 2 greatest seasons we've ever seen in Formula One. And he somehow topped himself from last year. And last year was already otherworldly. This is off the scale. 19 wins is on the table for Max this season. 19! No, like, only one team in history has ever won 19 Grand Prix in a season, and that was a 2016 Mercedes, where I think they won 19 out of 21 that year. Only one team has won 19 Grand Prix. Max might do it on his own.
Dre, what's the saying about winning races at turn 1?
I've always said, you can't win a race at turn 1, but you certainly can lose one at turn 1. And look, I actually give Christian Horner some degree of credit on this one, because he said to the media after the race that when he was consoling Perez on camera during his downtime in that period, he said, look, you're a fast racing driver at your home circuit. You're not a racing driver if you wouldn't try it. He understood where Perez was coming from, and I'm glad he did, because I do too. Mm-hmm. Like, it's very easy to take that at face value and go, oh, well, Checo's just fucked up. But the way I look at it, Checo was genuinely competitive this weekend. The way I see it. Like, his long run form was very similar to Max's. He was less than a tenth and a half behind him on the track. Yes, Ricciardo did not help by sticking his AlphaTauri in there in what is, by all accounts this season, an outlier, given where AlphaTauri are at this year. But even so, Perez was exactly where he needed to be. It was a very weird qualifying session where the temperature actually dropped by a couple of degrees over the course of the session, and that, because the air is thinner in Mexico, nobody ever mentions the thin air in Mexico, the track temperature actually dropped by 9. It was because the air is thinner, so it makes the track cooler quicker. So let's put it this way. Charles Leclerc was 1.1 seconds faster between Q2 and Q3 because the track temperature dropped so bad, and that's how narrow Ferrari's operating window is. That's how freaky this session was. But I digress. The point I'm getting at here is that I understand why Checo went for it. It was his home Grand Prix. He'd seen his teammate pull off that move 2 years prior. And he's probably not going to get a better chance to win any race, let alone his home race. And look, I've said it on other shows. The Mexicans are fucking loyal. You see them at every Grand Prix weekend you go to. Checo's got a massive fan base and an infamous fan base and following, depending on who you ask on social media. I think there was something like 140,000 at this Grand Prix on race day.
Yeah, I love it.
It's like people are, oh, get rid of Mexico. I'm like, look, it draws far too much money. Yeah, they had 400,000 over the weekend. Like, this is a massive cash cow for Formula One to be in Mexico, all right? Point I'm getting at here is that he's not going to get a better chance to win a Grand Prix this year again than this one. And it's his home Grand Prix, and Mexico would have stood still if he'd won this motherfucker. I get it. I absolutely get it. Yes, he didn't quite pull it off. And look, in real time, it looks a lot like Lewis Hamilton in Qatar. But
he pulled a me in Qatar after the race when Hamilton's debriefing on the Max Verstappen podcast.
The man himself said it. And look, I do find it funny to me that we were much more willing to give Lewis Hamilton the benefit of the doubt for a carbon copy move than Sergio Perez did 2 weeks later. There is probably something to that. Maybe Hamilton's earned a bigger benefit than that. Maybe it's the nature of Team LH. I don't know. But it's probably somewhere in the middle of that. But I get it. I get why he did it. He would have been a hero if he pulled it off. He went in too hot. He fought, and the Leclerc's car was never going to vanish in that space. Max had already won the corner. Leclerc was more than reasonable in the amount of space he could give on both sides. Yeah.
Leclerc got the heat for it for an accident that was not his fault. And Checo even said, like, hey, that was not his fault.
No, I'm glad Checo addressed that and said, look, can you guys calm down, please? Yeah. Because Charles, this is another small tangent I want to say here. Charles Leclerc did not deserve to be booed. And look, I have given up the fight on trying to trivialize booing. It's a part of sport. Like, people have paid their hard-earned money. They've got the right to boo if they feel so. And not that I necessarily agree with it. But what I would also say is that if you're an F1 fan and you think this sport is above this shit, it isn't. Because we all saw the clips of people in Red Bull merchandise assaulting Ferrari fans in the side of the track, and thankfully that fan was ejected and was given a lifetime ban. So I'm glad that Formula One stepped in quickly regarding that. But just because your favorite driver's had a bad day in a mistake that was almost 100% of his own making doesn't mean you have the right to make somebody else's day miserable. We're better than this.
Save the booing for your country's most evil politicians when they hand out trophies on the podium. That's what I'd say.
Yeah, like, if it's Greg Abbott, fuck it, boo away. But, not Charles Leclerc did not deserve that treatment at all. And I'm glad that at least Checo recognized that and went in to defend him, because he's absolutely right to say that. And I'm glad he took accountability for it, because not many drivers do. I mean, unfortunately, we'll get into Yuki Tsunoda in a minute, but Tsunoda went the other way. Tsunoda doubled down, which did not help. He said, look, they like the big teams. And I'm like, oh, come on, Yuki, come on. Now, you can't blame Piastri for that one. We'll get into that in a minute, but it's Checo could not have chosen a worse weekend for him to do that. And again, I understand why. I totally get why. he played the percentages and went all in. I completely understand it. But in a weekend where you were as competitive as you've been all year, in a weekend where Daniel Ricciardo brought home the best AlphaTauri result of the year, and genuinely looked impressive, you couldn't have chosen a worse time to lose the roll of the dice on that one, because it's now going to put even more pressure on Red Bull to move on from you. And look, I'll give Horner and Marco this. They are both adamant. They've dug in on this. They're not getting rid of Checo. Now, again, whether you want to take Christian Horner at his word is up to you. I can completely understand why you wouldn't. But on this one, he and Marco literally said in interviews after the race, look, I'm sick of you people asking me about this. He's got a contract. We're going to honor it, and we're not getting rid of him. But because of the way they've treated drivers so often in the past, it makes people cynical, and I can understand why.
Anyway, by the way, Daniel Ricciardo, where has this driver been since dumping Enstone for McLaren a couple of years back, other than that one weekend in Monza, that one really good weekend in Monza? Because Daniel Ricciardo qualified fourth, as we talked about, and then he would go on to run in the top five for most of the race and finish seventh in a heated last lap dogfight with George Russell. Almost got sixth if that race was a lap longer. So Dre, as he put himself in the shop window for promotion, and will AlphaTauri get off the bottom of the standings? And I can answer that second question for you, because they already have. Daniel Ricciardo's points brought AlphaTauri from 10th in the table to 8th on countback.
Yes, they're now tied with Alfa Romeo, but Ricciardo's 7th place breaks the tie, because the best and any Alfa Romeo has finished the season was 8th, and that was Valtteri Bottas on the opening round, all the way back in March in Bahrain. I mean, I don't know with Daniel Ricciardo. I need to see more of this. Let's not forget, this is only his third race back. He was meant to have had 8. He was meant to have
it's
7 Grand Prix.
Race back, because he came back in Austin and he was coming off the hand injury. I guess this was his third race back if you count before the hand injury.
Yeah, I mean, he did Hungary. He was fine. He did Belgium. He was outclassed by Tsunoda that weekend. Zandvoort was obviously cut short for obvious reasons. It's only his 5th race since he's come back, and really it's only 4 because Zandvoort doesn't really count. I mean, it's inconclusive. That's my big problem with this, is that this seemingly was an outlier. Pierre Gasly himself this weekend, obviously as a guy who knows AlphaTauri, said, you could see what AlphaTauri's done to make their car fast. And it was, when he was asked, he was like, what was it? He was like, well, no, it's obvious if I tell you. But he basically hinted at the fact that AlphaTauri had a cracked setup this weekend, and it showed. It's hard to argue it didn't show. Yeah. 4th in qualifying
package and a cracked setup. That's great.
Yeah, fourth in qualifying, 7th in the race, was fighting George Russell for 6th on the final lap of the race. George himself admitted if that race was 1 lap longer, he doesn't finish 6th, basically. Ricciardo was all over him like a hot rash at the end of that race. That was the best in AlphaTauri's looked all year. Probably the best in a couple of years, I would argue, that in terms of AlphaTauri and how good they've been.
It could have been so much better. Again, what is it with drivers in the Red Bull umbrella that I like? Having unfortunate accidents when you just think it's all going to come together for them, because Yuki Tsunoda drove from the back of the grid to 7th and was going to make this even better, and then he pulls a really clumsy move on Oscar Piastri that makes everybody think of, bad Yuki from the first 2 years of his career, when he's generally been the best version of himself this season up to this point.
Everything came up Millhouse for Yuki. He had to start from the back of the grid after taking a whole new power unit for the weekend. So AlphaTauri was prepared to sacrifice his weekend already. They took a new power unit. He was running up to around, I think it was 12th or so. He took an early aggressive pit stop to try and get some clean air. He got lucky with the red flag because it meant it was able to promote himself up the field because he was on fresh rubber, and mitigated a lot of the need for a second pit stop. He was running 8th. He was stuck behind Oscar Piastri, and when he finally did try to pass him, he clipped the outside of him in a very similar move to what Checo did. He's braked late. He's assumed that Piastri's car's going to vanish. It didn't, and he's clipped him and he's gone into the grass. I mean, it's just that would have likely have been 6 more points for AlphaTauri, and that would have put them in the range of Williams, potentially in the fight for what could be 7th in the Constructors. It's still a really good weekend for AlphaTauri, but it could have been a bananas weekend for AlphaTauri this weekend. We could have been looking at as many as maybe 16 points, which would have been otherworldly for this team, given that they only had, God, I want to say 4 of them before a Kota last week.
By the way, this now means that Haas is now officially the worst team in Formula One, because no team has finished last in the Constructors' Championship with a double-digit score.
Haas has 12 points. No team that has ever finished bottom of the Constructors has ever scored as many as 12. Yay for the 2010 scoring system. But yeah, it is funny how this is all shaken out now, and it's a weird fight at the moment now with Williams that are still chipping away at it. I mean, Alex Albon getting in the points is no longer a surprise. He's done it 6 times in the last 12 weekends. It was
It's crazy to think about. Again, I've always said that the worst thing that could have happened to Logan Sargent was for there to be expectations to score points in his first season with Williams.
And guess what's happened? And as a direct result of that, now Williams are now scoring points on a semi-frequent basis, and now everyone's put the pressure on Logan Sargent because he's got 1 point compared to Albon's 25. It's not a fair fight, but that's Formula One for you sometimes. Yeah, I mean, it's been a remarkable turnaround at Williams, and shout out to James Vowles, who's done an unbelievable job in turning them around so quickly. And he became a dad again today as well. So congrats to James Vowles and the family, and lovely baby girl on social media that you may have seen. So congrats to the Vowles family. But yeah, like Williams are kicking ass right now, and then you've got AlphaTauri, who have shot up in the back half of the season. Their upgrade seems to have done them wonders. Alfa Romeo are the participation trophy team of Formula One this year, and I will not hear any argument otherwise. They're just there. They're just
the most intriguing thing about this Alfa Romeo team, as we know them, is like the will they, won't they rumors regarding whether Audi is going to get cold feet and pull out of this project 2 years before it's supposed to kick into gear.
You're the sports car man. Get your people, because it was Radio Le Monde that started this crazy talk. And I don't know where it's come from, this idea that Audi is suddenly going to... Do you know how embarrassing a look it would be for Audi if they pulled out at this point? Having already bought a chunk of an F1 team, having already committed to a 2026... They've unveiled the car, they've unveiled the launch, and then they back out of it a year later. It would do catastrophic damage to the Volkswagen Group.
So bad. And this is like on the back of, like, you know, if you talk to people in the sports car community, you're just like, they have burned their bridges with customer teams all up and down GT and touring car racing and potential customers with the prototype that they scrapped, even though it would have been cost efficient because it's really just a Porsche 19 with Audi stickers. But I don't know. I hope that's not the case. I understand that Audi has done a lot of reshuffling across the board in corporate, and I know it's not just the folks at Midweek Motorsport that are picking up on this, but it would be
started it.
very, very, very weird for that to happen, and that would be awful for Sauber Technologies Formula One.
Sauber would be toast as we know it, because
they were almost toast when BMW pulled the plug.
They fought this off 3 or 4 times in the last decade or so. It's not been great, but it would be catastrophic damage to the Volkswagen Group if they put together an F1 bid and then pulled out. And then there's Haas, who, God bless them, are trying.
Bless them.
Like, Hulkenberg pulled in a shift to try and get 10th place.
Nico Hulkenberg, with no DRS, was holding off the Alpines with DRS. And that says a lot about Nico Hulkenberg's driving ability and also just how powerful and the Alpine power units are compared to the competition.
Otmar, in his last weekend as Alpine team principal, said that they were maybe as much as 30 to 40 horsepower down. A lot of people took that as political talk. It's more than obvious to me they are certainly down on something. Now, this may not be the best example of it because, like I said, Mexico, thinner air. These cars are producing 25% less downforce than they normally do. And because the air is thinner, DRS is not as effective as it normally is. Even so, it's pretty clear the Alpines lack grunt. That's more than obvious. And like I said, Hulkenberg tried. He really tried. And it was only the fact that we all know Haas cooks their tyres, and he just ran out of steam with about 6 laps to go.
Saute those tires. They put those tires in the oven at 350 and leave them in there for 25 minutes.
Oh, yeah. It's a wild one. Ooh.
Anyway, Ricciardo. Ricciardo.
I need to see more. I need to see more. I mean, if Red Bull wanted to, they easily could. Ricciardo's made it abundantly clear that he wants to be back in the Red Bull factory team for 2025. Yeah. That was his aim. Christian Horner had no problem entertaining that line of thinking, at least. Yeah. Me personally, I've kind of had the stance since Japan that if you wanted to move on from Checo, he's your bottleneck, not Lawson or Tsunoda or Ricciardo in that AlphaTauri camp. But I think the jury is still out on Daniel since coming back. I think it's a nice thought, and this was obviously a fantastic weekend from Ricciardo. No one is disputing that. I know I'm certainly not.
Yeah.
But will the real Daniel Ricciardo please stand up? Because he was nothing like this in any of the other weekends he's been in since coming back. So if right now this is an outlier, I need to see more. I'm very curious to see how he gets on at Brazil. We've still got Vegas, which is going to be a complete outlier for the field. No one knows what we're going to be getting into with that. And then Abu Dhabi at the end is almost like a testing weekend for many people. So again, we're going to have to wait and see. He's
anecdotally, he's the last truly great second driver that Red Bull has had. Mm-hmm. But that was 5 years ago. The last time we saw Daniel Ricciardo in that competitive a car, like other than 1 weekend in Monza, he was solidly outperformed.
Yeah, like there's no getting around it. Like we just don't know. It's just the results are all over the place. The sample size, in my opinion, is too small. He's had less race weekends since coming back than Liam Lawson got by replacing him with the metacarpal injury. It's like he's had 4 race weekends in full. Lawson got 5, basically. And one of them was kind of like a half weekend in Zandvoort in the first because he was in on emergency notice. But they've basically had the same amount of running minus the 5,000 kilometers you get in an off season that Lawson didn't get. So for me, it's hard to evaluate between Ricciardo and Tsunoda who's front of the queue. I just don't know. I think Ricciardo probably is front of the queue because why else would you bring him back? In my opinion, because if you felt this way about the freeze early on, you could have just put Lawson in early and abandoned his Super Formula campaign. They didn't, so
they didn't, and he finished an incredible runner-up in the championship with 3 wins in the season. Won his debut race. It was a good year for him.
It's been an outstanding year for Liam Lawson. He's a fantastic driver. He's a fantastic talent. And he was only beaten, really, by a fantastic campaign by Ritomo Miata, who won the Super Formula title this past weekend. Congratulations to him. And as a quick side note, as someone that's also on the neurodivergent spectrum, representation matters. Congratulations.
And he can win a second title in GT500 this weekend. Probably by the time this episode goes out. He'd only be the 5th person in history to do it, and he'd do it at 24 years old.
Decent talent.
Yeah,
decent
just
talent.
a bit. Why they would put him in a GT3 car next year, I don't know. Unless you're trying to learn the circuits and the procedures, because not put him in faster equipment.
Exactly. So, I don't know what the landscape's going. I mean, it's hard to evaluate this situation at AlphaTauri in general because Sonoda's form is a question mark due to lack of teammate comparison. Lawson only did 5 race weekends and was good, but you've already determined that it wasn't good enough to jump the queue. And Ricciardo, who you built this plan around in the first place, has only had 4 full race weekends. And he's not been particularly special in 3 of them. So I don't know. It's hard to say. I still think Ricciardo's in front of the queue, but again, if how you feel,
you're doing it more off of vibes than like tangible results,
right? Like here's how I look at it. As to put a neat bow on this segment. If you're the sort of person that thinks Sergio Perez should be replaced, the last 2 weekends are only going to cement that opinion. It's done nothing to change your mind. Surely, if that's the way you feel about Checo at this point. If you're more in the camp of wanting to keep him, then this weekend did not help. And that's the unfortunate nature of swings and roundabouts in this sport. But for me, I think Ricciardo is front of the line, but it's not as simple as that. And that's the problem.
It's tough. But, it could always be worse. It could be Aston Martin right now. Worst weekend of the year. Fernando Alonso retires after floor damage. He picked up a piece of Perez's debris, and that punctured a big old hole in the floor, and that ruined its handling. Lance Stroll could not make miracles happen from another pit lane start, even with the older spec car that seems to be working to the upgrade package. And just for his troubles, he gets punted late by Valtteri Bottas. So where do you see this team going forward with rumors and speculation of Senator Armstrong quality that Alonso might bail at the end of the year?
First of all, Albert Fabrega, what the fuck are you playing at? Dude, I heard this earth-shattering rumor that I can't tell you what it is.
Dude, that's crazy. F1 journos are acting like pro wrestling journos for a day. That's so crazy.
So yeah, subscribe to Fightful for $5 to get the full scoop on this story. I'm joking. I love Sean Ross Sapp. He's the man. Genuine mate of mine from way back. But yeah, you're so right. It's so pro wrestling.
This is missing 50 eyes emojis and 35 popcorn emojis.
Oh yeah.
And the big thing that people were drawing inference is well, they're going to take Perez out of the car and put in Fernando Alonso instead because he wants one more chance at the top light car because it's not going well. Because I've been a Fernando Alonso fan for 20 years, and I can tell you when the times are good, they're great. And when the times are not going so good, it can be very, very, very petulant.
Yeah, it's a Grosjean-esque situation. It's wonderful when things are great. When it's not great, we're all going to know about it. We've come full circle on this episode. I mean, the one that got me was a stat that was passed on to me by Glenn Freeman at the race, who does a brilliant job with the Bring Back V10s podcast, which many people know about. The last 4 race weekends, Aston Martin has scored 14 points.
Is that good?
It's apocalyptically bad. Let's put it to you this way. Aston Martin are now very lucky that at this point they probably have nothing to play for. Is how I look at it, because they're pretty much now locked into 5th. They were competing against McLaren. They have lost that fight. McLaren has surpassed them. They're going to go into the distance.
That's crazy to think where these two teams started. Aston Martin, probably second best constructor. McLaren, we're wondering, are they even going to get points before we get to Europe? And my, how things have changed. McLaren's going up one way, and Aston Martin's going down, down, down.
It's like they've swapped cars. It's like Freaky Friday has taken place in Formula One form between them and McLaren. But let's not forget, McLaren sacked James Key after 2 races this season. They reshuffled for the 3rd time in 6 years. They brought Peter Prodromou back up into the fourfold. They put a brand new triangle offense structure as to how their team was organized. And after Austria, they have been the second best team in Formula One by a country mile. Lando Norris, I think, has been the second highest point scorer in Formula One since the summer break. And Alonso, well, Autosport put this out there this morning. First 9 races of the year, Alonso had 131 points. He's had 52 in the last 10. And 18 of those was the Zandvoort second place that he got in a changeable conditions. Like, it's gone fundamentally wrong here, and I think it boils down to the classic case of the Silverstone team opening the year with a good concept, but then not being able to take it any further as the rest of the field with better resources and more money in some cases are able to surpass them and beat them in the development race, because that's clearly what's happened here. Ferrari were panned universally at the start of this season, but largely they've got their shit together. There's been a lot less Hods in the second half of the year. And if Cam was here, he'd either come in right now with a frying pan and whack me in the back of the head for saying so. But I think I can get away with it here. Ferrari's genuinely been good in the second half of the year. That's one thing. Mercedes have consistently been, for me, the third best team in F1 right now. Maybe there's a weekend where one team beats them, but they've always been like the number 3 team here. And they've had Hamilton that has punched above his weight a lot of the time in these races. And then McLaren, who have scored 200-plus points in the last 10 Grand Prix. They've just been racking up podiums and high-class results, and even got a sprint win in Qatar with Piastri. McLaren has a good second scorer again for the first time since Ricciardo was been and gone. Like this... Aston Martin did itself no favours by Lance Stroll having an all-time bad season by his standards as well. That's something that you've got to factor into all of this. Having a better second car would have certainly softened the blow here. But this team is cheeks at the moment. Like I said to you on the WTF1 podcast we did together, RJ, like, we literally said that for all the shit we've given them, even Alpine looks more consistent than they do at the moment.
Which is crazy, because Alpine has never met an upheaval in upper management that it didn't want to go through this year.
Yeah. And that is a team that has sacked its team boss, sacked its sporting director, a 30-plus year veteran of the Enstone team, Adam Permain, God bless him. I think the stat is that Alpine has replaced every senior member of its staff at least once in the last 4 years, including a CEO that got absolutely torched by Alan Prost on the way out. Dunning-Kruger effect. I still piss myself when I read that comment. Point is that Alpine has been roasted for the way they've handled this season. Some of it deservedly.
Yeah.
And right now they look like a better team than Aston Martin do. If this season started tomorrow and it was a 3-race championship, I'm not sure Aston Martin even finish in 5th.
I think they'd be lucky to crack the top 8.
Right now, Williams, like, the only blessing here is that when they went back to the Austin spec, Alonso was genuinely fast. He's been very unlucky that he's had 2 floor damaging moments in the last 2 races. But even then, Alonso looked sloppy going into this race. He spun in practice.
How do you put an upgrade package and make the car worse?
It says to me that you fundamentally don't understand your car. Which is amazing given how good it was to start this season.
Yeah, and you talked about it. Alonso was sloppy this weekend. He spins in practice, he spins in qualifying. That brings out a Gel flag, which ironically catches out Lando Norris, and that's why his drive to 5th place looks so much more impressive.
Right. It's there's no getting around it. It's just it's an ugly time for Aston Martin. They look like the team they were towards the back end of last year when they were scrapping with Alpha for 7th. Rather than, like, look, this is still a very good season for Aston Martin, but there's going to be a tinge of disappointment where people are going to ask, and it's a valid question, what could have been?
Yeah, you'll always have to ask that when people are talking multiple times about, could they win a race early this year? I didn't think they would, but they got multiple podiums out of it and came pretty close in Monaco. Yeah,
they had a golden chance to win in Monaco. Alonso famously said this was going to be the last race we were going to be on the podium after that Catalonia bad weekend, where again he damaged his floor that Catalonia weekend and had to put up with it for the rest of the weekend. He said after that weekend that they wouldn't be off the podium again. They've had 2 since then. Oh, Fernando.
Love you,
Never
bud.
I have deep respect for you, buddy, but you don't have to put your foot in it sometimes. It's a glorious thing. No, I mean, like you said, and I have to double down on this point. Like, it's still a very good season for Aston Martin, no matter which way you slice it. This is a 2-place improvement. That is it's a massive step in the right direction for them as a team overall. But people are going to look back on this year and realize how much they left on the table with slightly better execution, better development of their car, and I'm sorry, Lance, but a better second driver. It is embarrassing how big the point difference is between Alonso and Stroll this year. Stroll is fighting the Alpines, which, I mean, right now actually isn't an unfair reflection of where Aston Martin are at right now. The problem is Fernando had 7 podiums this year. That's the problem by comparison. And I'm not saying, I'm not saying that ultimately that Stroll should be keeping up with Fernando. He's an all-time great. But if you're able to back him up just a little bit more, you might have been able to cling on to this 4th place. And give Mercedes and Ferrari a genuine bloody nose, and they've had to work really hard to become 2nd and 3rd best teams in F1 again. They've had to go through their fair share of shit. Ferrari was spent the first half of the year cleaning up the back end of the Binotto era. David Sanchez is gone. Laurent Mekies is going to AlphaTauri next year. Mercedes, literally the day before we recorded this, I've had Mike Elliott handing his notice. Mr. Zero Side Pod. Mr. Performance Advantage locked in for years, and he's leaving the team.
If Ferrari wanted somebody to look vaguely like Matteo Binotto, they could just bring Mike Elliott in.
JJ Abrams having ass. He's taking a break, but he'll be looking for his next adventure soon. But let's put it to you this way: the impact of Ferrari and Mercedes underperforming has been felt, because Ferrari's had to reshuffle its team to get to this point, and Mercedes have had their biggest technical officer, the man who, I still think it's ironic, the man did the zero sideboard concept and then basically got out of the way via promoting himself so that James Allison could do the day-to-day running of that car and team again. But the impact's been felt, and Aston Martin's probably felt it the most of any team out there, because they've gone from genuine race-winning contender to back end of the points, which is just not good enough for a team of their stature. And we're just about done here on this episode of Motorsport 101 already. Wow, that was a fast one.
This felt familiar.
It did feel familiar. It's almost like we did the whole thing on another slightly bigger network. For those who may not have noticed or who follow me personally, yes, we did a very similar version of this on the WTF1 podcast this past Monday.
You get the uncut version of this.
Yeah, you get the After Dark edition. It's great. Shall I explain the story of how we got to this point? Because it's only fair I actually explain this, because it's sort of Motorsport 101. Who cares, right? We're friends here. Basically, what had happened was that Harry Benjamin, you may know him from his Formula 3 commentary work. He's done the F1 Academy gig. He did the F1 Kids broadcast in Hungary as well. He also hosts one half of the WTF1 podcasts we do every week. We did his Austin race review on Sunday night. The same Sunday the race happened. He messaged me saying, hi Dre, here's our episode. I'm on holiday next week, so here's our recording. I took that as he's not going to be here for the Mexico episode in a week's time because he's going to be on holiday, when what he actually meant was, I'm literally taking the next 7 days off. So here's the reason why this podcast taping is here on Sunday night. I got that wrong. I tried to be proactive and tried to just have a show to fill in without realizing that he and Callan was going to record the day afterwards. Whoops.
But the good news is that they also gave us another podcast. So WTF1 fans, you got 2 podcasts this week.
Yeah, you got 3 for the price of 2. So if you're a fan of me, brilliant. You got even more of me than you normally do.
If you're not, well, tough luck.
Sorry about that. Better luck next week. My bad is basically the way I can sum this up. So now you know the inside story as to how I goosed up on this one.
Well, it could be worse. You could be the Las Vegas Raiders and hire the worst football coach that there is, and then just be surprised that it went as bad as it did, and then have to sack him.
Who keeps giving Josh McDaniels head coaching gigs, honestly? More on that in our football podcast next week. As mentioned, Cam's a little bit under the weather, so we're going to hopefully do MotoGP's catch-up of Buriram and Phillip Island, two incredible race weekends, by the way. If you have not seen the Buriram race, go out of your way to watch it. Probably MotoGP's race of the year is what I would say. And yeah, Phillip Island's crown lasted less than a week. Amazing how these things work out in the end. But we'll hopefully be doing that to catch up with next week. So forgive us for the delay on that one. Get well soon to Mr. Buckley. I know he'll be listening in. Get well soon, big man. Places you can find us real quick. We are on twitter.com/motorsport_101. Our personal handles are at Dre_WTF1 and at RJ O'Connell. Our website is motorsport101.com if you want some extra thoughts on this race weekend, as well as the MotoGP race in Buriram. You can check out the blog section on that. It's also getting towards season review season, so there'll be plenty of written content coming up at the back end of November, so look forward to some of that as well. And if you really like us, you can back us financially on Patreon, patreon.com/motorsport101. $5 gets you early access to all of our shows before they go live to the public. You can upgrade to the $10 level, where you can listen to these episodes live as they're being recorded, interact with us in the chat, and get into the supporters club of our Discord server. That'll do it. Next weekend will be Formula One in Brazil, the fan favorite at Interlagos. Really looking forward to that one. It's a sprint weekend as well. Yay, woo.
The last one. It's the last one.
Sixth sprint of the year. The final one of the season. Who knows? Maybe they'll give Hamilton a new engine and put him at the back. And could be fun. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, until next time, I've been Dre Harrison. He's been RJ O'Connell for the second time this week. Thank you very much for listening. Sayonara.
Later, y'all. Again.
It's Groundhog Day. Again.